ready?
Ready.
Hey, I'm Mark Andriani,
I'm Jane Register.
and this is the
Echo
Echo Collective. Well, hey, I just want to welcome this community to my dear friend, Jane. Jane, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the show. And I'm just going to brag about Jane a little bit. Jane, if apparently you've lived more lives than most people in your...
I've lived a lot.
Yeah, you've lived a lot of different lives. You have a master's in intercultural studies from Fuller Theological Seminary, which is deeply impressive because that's not an easy school to go through. And you have lived, I would guess, in more countries than most people and more states than most people. And you've had this very, very interesting... Nomadic. Oh my gosh. Would you say sojourning?
Yeah, I feel like I'm still sojourning.
Yeah, aren't we all? Aren't we all? Well, Thank you for being here, and I'm just going to jump right in. I'm going to ask you about when you think about your own life and your own way that you see the world. Talk to me about, like, what is the thing that forms the way you view the world? Because you're on this podcast because I think you're super interesting, and the way that you see the world is so valuable that I'm like, I need more people to hear from you. Like, tell me what it is that formed you about how you see the world the way that you do. That could be anything.
Okay. I think for me, there have been so many formative elements that I feel like God's really orchestrated, to be honest. And I grew up in the suburbs of Jersey. I was born in Philly, and my parents moved us to Jersey, to a suburb.
When you hear the song Fresh Prince of Bel-Air,
Oh gosh, yeah.
do you think
Yeah.
in West Philadelphia?
I mean, I still play that. I would say maybe every other day.
And that's you?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
So we grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, affluent suburb of Philly, and but my parents kept us at a church in West Philly, and so I think for me, I just had a lot of exposure to different realities, different lived realities, and my neighborhood that I was in was predominantly white, predominantly Jewish. Actually, I feel like there were more synagogues than churches. So, I had this like mentality where I thought, oh, all white people are Jewish, and then my parents were like, no, they're not all Jewish, just our neighborhood.
And without giving away the punchline, what's your maiden name?
Register.
Your maiden name?
Oh, Kim.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you're not watching this, you're just listening, you probably wouldn't pick up on the fact that you are Korean, like
Yes.
fully Korean,
100%.
growing up in a white Jewish neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I think that frames it a little bit, just because I'm like, oh, maybe they're not watching, they're listening. Yeah.
True.
Jane Kim, deeply
Kim.
Korean. Okay.
Deeply Korean. My grandmother lived with us, and she made kimchi on the driveway. It was very embarrassing for me. But we grew up very assimilated, but went to a Korean immigrant church in West Philly. And we were a block from West Philly High. We were a few blocks from the mosque. Our church was shared with a Cambodian refugee church, but we were also right next to UPenn. So it was a convergence of so many different cultures.
That's a full-blown melting pot.
Yes.
Or is it a melting pot? Because it's not like they were all assimilating together with one another, but they're just like existing side by side, right? Oh my gosh.
But also kind of coming into contact with each other, and so I think for me, growing up in a Christian institution, where I was doing all my Bible studies and discipleship, and then walking out the doors of the church and trying to understand what it meant. What does this even mean? Like, what I learned, like, how do I apply that to this very different reality than what I am growing up with in my, suburban neighborhood? And so that kind of led me down an interesting trajectory. I think I always felt like, for me and my family, we were in a lot of ways like the other. We didn't quite belong, even though we did soccer, gymnastics, dance. We did all like the American things. We went to camp at the Y, and really my parents were like, we're only speaking English in the home, and we're not doing Korean school.
Like eradicating the language from your life.
Yeah.
So you don't speak Korean?
I speak it now.
Oh,
And so,
interesting.
I mean, I love languages.
Okay.
And so I was very intentional about still learning it.
But your parents were like, you will not speak Korean
Yeah.
because you need to basically, it's almost like you need to present white.
Yeah. In a lot of ways.
Wow.
Yeah.
Except for the kimchi on the driveway.
Except for the kimchi on the driveway.
Okay.
But I think for me, I was very aware that we didn't quite belong and we didn't quite fit anywhere. Like, even though we could speak perfect English, we did all like the American things, we weren't white. We weren't Jewish, And then I think because my parents didn't do like some of the traditional like immigrant jobs, in some ways it felt like we were a little distance from other Korean immigrant families at our church. And so there was that kind of weird, we don't quite belong here, we don't quite belong there. And so I always felt drawn to people that didn't quite belong. And so I was like, well, that's me. And I identify with that. So I was always drawn to people that were on the margins or weren't centered. And I've always kind of felt home in that space. And I think even professionally, I feel like God's always kind of drawn me, professionally and personally, drawn me to the one person that looks like, why are you here? Why would you come to this thing?
Yeah. That's fascinating. So let me just ask you this because it's the tail end of what you just said. Like, what do you do professionally? Like, your job is not easy, and I want to hear more about it.
I work for World Relief. We are actually the humanitarian arm of the National Association of Evangelicals. And we started in the aftermath of actually World War II. And that was our very first beginnings in Boston. But our local expression, actually, our local office started in the aftermath of the Vietnam War. And so that's when I would say 100,000 Vietnamese were in refugee camps at military bases in the U.S. And so it was Camp Pendleton, actually. That was a refugee camp. And
wait, so Pendleton in Oceanside was a previously refugee camp?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, fascinating.
So, I mean, it was people coming on boats at the time. And so it was local churches that were helping families resettle and find jobs and enroll in schools. And so that's how our office started. But I started the office for World Relief in San Diego about 6 years ago. And I have stayed. And it's been a really interesting 6 years. Yeah.
So so World Relief is the humanitarian arm of the National Association of Evangelicals, but like, what are you doing? Like, in the San Diego office, what are you doing?
Yeah. We're doing a lot. I mean, I'd say my primary function has been connecting local churches with refugees and immigrants that have been impacted. And so it's not very different from our beginnings in the 70s, because it's connecting local churches with people that are in vulnerable situations, so they can navigate and acclimate to a new country, new language, new culture, new systems. And sometimes that looks like literally just like a one-to-one partnership, like partnering a volunteer with a client of ours. Sometimes that looks like doing policy work or advocacy work. Sometimes it looks like doing educational engagements, like speaking at schools, speaking at churches. And then I'm doing a lot of fundraising.
Yeah. So the nature of what you do is very holistic. When you're talking about these clients, you're actually talking about human beings who are refugees or immigrants that your job through your organization is to provide them with the necessary care and resources to be able to resettle their lives here in the States, specifically in San Diego?
Specifically, San Diego, and now also in Orange County /LA.
Okay. And I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because I'm thinking about all the ways that this could get weird. But I would imagine on a political level, your job is not easy.
No.
Yeah. And I'm just going to say that.
Yeah.
no matter what we think about any policies or politics of any particular idea around that, like, I just want to acknowledge that I know that your job's not easy, but the thing that you're doing is so closely associated to the things that I read in the Bible about what Jesus is doing. So tell me more about why you do what you do. Like, here's the thing. You already said that you felt othered as a child, living in a predominantly white Jewish neighborhood, being told by your parents to present white in your neighborhood, to assimilate into the surrounding cultures, basically to like power through life.
Yeah.
And then now you are working with the people who we would deem, I think, culturally as othered. Why?
I mean, I feel like that is a journey that God's had me on my whole life. And I think I was very aware growing up where I grew up that even as a Korean American, that I had privilege and that I could get in a car and drive away, you know, and go into our suburban neighborhood, you know, and attend a really good school, you know, and that I had access to opportunities, you know. And I think for me, the piece that really was a turning point or something that really shifted kind of my trajectory was I didn't see the church actually saying very much. And actually, there were often times where we would be leaving church and somebody would say to us, make sure if somebody comes up to you, don't give them money. If they ask you for something, don't give it to them.
Don't give them money.
Yeah.
Why?
Because they're going to use it for drugs.
Oh, fascinating.
You know, and you know, we're little, you know, and so you just do what you're told. And I think as I got older, I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, something doesn't add up. And so I was always drawn to that, like, how do we get here to this point where people are living with such vastly different lived realities? And that seems very unfair because it's just happenstance that you're born there, I'm born here, you know, and so I went down this road of studying sociology and psychology, and I wanted to join the Peace Corps and all these things, and I went down that path in some ways because even out of college, I had this opportunity to work for a venture capitalist, and he basically, you know, ran a number of different businesses. And it was real estate, he ran parking garages and several businesses. And then he happened to have these 2 charter schools that he started in West Philly. And I was like, that sounds interesting. And he was like, okay. And it was an interesting job because he let us create our own job descriptions. And so he's like, whatever kind of piques your interest, like, do that. And so I was like, I want to go into these charter schools in West Philly. And he was recruiting kind of like the brightest and the best, you know, college grads from, like, you know, Philadelphia. And for me, it was like, oh, this is interesting. He's not Christian. He's Jewish. He's a venture capitalist. And but he happened to be impacted and take notice of the neighborhood he was driving through on his commute into downtown Philadelphia, you know, to Center City. And he decided to invest in change in those communities. And so you know, that started this whole trajectory of working in inner city education, outdoor inner city education. I was an urban forester for a number of years. And
urban forester, just define terms.
Urban forester. So it is a position, it's basically a field where you are reforesting the inner city. So think about like just traditional forestry, but you are, it's a lot of like environmental mitigation. And the funding actually that we got was from fines for air pollution.
Oh, wow. That's funny.
So it was really interesting.
That is interesting.
So I think that for me was an extremely like defining season of discipleship, because it was a community-based tree planting where residents in the community had agency. and they got to apply for these tree planting events in their communities, and they got to pick their trees. But a big part of it was actually mobilizing the community. And in most of these neighborhoods, there was a church. And I would ask them, well, where's a church? And they're like, oh, nobody lives here anymore. They just commute in. And
So the people that are attending the church don't even live in the community?
No.
Oh, that's...
Most of them had moved out. A lot of pastors and priests had moved out, but they would commute in.
And why would they move out? Just because it gets more impoverished? Is it dangerous?
I mean, that particular city that I worked in was the #1 for crime per capita.
Okay.
And it was the most impoverished city in the U.S.
Okay.
And so for most, if you can make it out, you leave.
Got it.
You know, because you've succeeded, you know.
Got it.
And so I would try to re-engage those churches, and it was interesting because I think for me, what I discovered was some of my most committed volunteers and most committed community members were guys that were on parole and probation, and the vast majority of them were in gangs. And so I think it was, for me, like seeing what I learned about in sociology in real life, but they were actually the ones who really like took me in, and they were like, okay, don't go down that street. If you're gonna go down that street, let one of us know, we'll walk you down, you know. And it was interesting because I felt like a kinship with them, and it kind of blew these stereotypes that I had been raised with and grown up with out of the water. And I was like, oh, these are just people, you know. And they would bring their family members to come and tree plant with them as well. And it made me see people differently. But I also encountered a group of Christians in one of the most actually disgusting parts of the city. It's where the sewage treatment plant was. And it's actually where a lot of the prostitutes and the drug dealers were, because it was right by the freeway. And so truck drivers could just pull off the exit and get whatever they needed. And most people that live in the neighborhood would tell me, don't ever stop at the stop signs, don't ever stop at the red lights, just drive through. And there was one day when I was prepping for a tree planting, and I saw a group of these like clean, kind of like college-y looking people, and they were all white, and I'm on the street, they're on the street, and we're like both looking at each other and like getting closer. And then when we finally like met each other, I was like, what are you doing here? This is like a terrible neighborhood. And they were like, what are you doing here? And I was like, I'm a tree planter, you know, I'm prepping for a tree planting. And they're like, we're Christians, and we moved into the neighborhood. And it was like, my mind was blown, because I hadn't ever seen Christians that were actually doing it. I was like, wait, you're actually doing what the Bible says? You're not just like reading about it, but you're actually like living it, you know? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, what do you guys do? And they just had built relationships with their literal neighbors. And so they started an after-school program in a home that they rented, and they would do community meals, and they just were like people of peace in their neighborhood. And it was mind-blowing for me, because I'd never seen that sort of Christ-likeness or Christian witness, I guess. Like people.
And they were young.
And they were young. They were in their 20s, you know. And I was like, oh my gosh, what do your parents think about this? Even though I was probably like the same age as them, you know.
Yeah.
But I think for me that set me down this different trajectory, and I was like, wait, there are different ways to live out your faith beyond attending church on a Sunday, or like a midweek service or whatever, or a Bible study. And that God sent me overseas after that. And so I spent probably about 2 years overseas in Africa, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Central America. And I mean, I would say that was like baptism by fire, you know, because it was exposure to so many different people that were on the margins, that were so clearly beloved by God. And I was like, wow.
And when you say so clearly beloved by God, you just recognize the fact that they are blessed and happy just because of how they are? Because, like, obviously we can say all day long that God loves everybody and that, you know, everybody's God's beloved, but like, what do you mean by that?
I think for me, like, I had grown up actually really fascinated by like the feed the children sort of like infomercial thing.
Sure.
I watched it for hours, you know. And when I was overseas, that's actually not what I saw. Like, I didn't see that sort of, there was, I mean, immense poverty.
Sure.
But I also, with that, saw immense faith and joy. And I remember sitting on the grounds at an orphanage in India, and it was the orphans that were leading the service. And they were leading the worship. They were leading the scripture. They're leading scripture and devotionals.
Indian orphans.
Yeah.
Huh.
And they hadn't been
Fascinating.
educated.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't like go to school. They didn't go to like Bible college. They were like, I mean, I would say they were like 5 to 12, you know, and, but they saw themselves as leaders in their community that could create change in their spirits, but also create change in their neighborhood and in their friend groups, you know. And I don't know, it was very, I think it, like, God just opened me to like a whole new world of what it looks like to express our faith and live it out. And I was like, well, maybe you don't need all these degrees. Maybe you don't have to go to a Bible college. Maybe you don't have to go to a seminary. Maybe it's actually a lot simpler than that, you know? And so after spending about 2 years overseas, I went to Fuller for seminary, and I actually really thought I was going to go back overseas because spent a lot of time in India again doing my practicum and in the red light district in the slums in Calcutta, and studying microfinance so I could go back and do that. And then God made it really clear that I was supposed to stay here. And so being here, I got connected with and introduced to the refugee community in San Diego through my husband, who was running a clothing company called Yumi Clothing. And I had no idea that there was such a rich refugee and immigrant community here in San Diego.
Yeah, because San Diego was or is a drop city, right?
Yeah.
It still is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, well, there's not a lot of resettlement going on right now.
Okay.
But historically, it has been. California has been.
Yeah.
It's like LA, Sacramento, Orange County, and San Diego. But he would do these like sewing classes, you know, and he's training men and women how to sew. And then I would go and help with childcare, you know. And so it was like an interesting way for me to see like, oh my gosh, there's so much that's happening in this city that's so close, but it feels so far in some ways from the lived reality that I have, you know, living in Carlsbad. And so when I was going back into the workforce, was like really praying, like, God, where do you want me to go? And Willie was like, I really think you're supposed to work with refugees. And so actually it was interesting. Somebody recruited me for this position. And it was a group of 3 churches and a nonprofit that had put together funding to start World Relief's office in San Diego.
Wow.
And so for me, it's been, I mean, such a privilege in the midst of like a really crazy, chaotic season. I think the part that's been really interesting for me, and I actually feel like really a blessing, is that I've been able to meet a lot of men and women that are coming from persecuted countries. Like they're Christians, and they were persecuted for their faith, and they have death sentences if they return to their countries.
All right, so let's talk about persecution. I wasn't planning on this, but let's talk about persecution just briefly, because you have experience talking to persecuted Christians, people who have been persecuted, which is a word we see a lot in the scripture. And I would say and you might be able to relate to this, obviously you have more overseas experience and dealing with a lot of different types of people, but I would say generally, and I feel scared to even say this out loud a little bit, generally when I hear a Christian talk about their persecuted experience, the thing I'm generally hearing is like, I got made fun of for wearing a Christian t-shirt, or the kids in my college dorm don't like me because of, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally do.
And when I read the scripture, I'm like looking at it going, I don't know that there's any world where we should call that persecution, but I also don't want to minimize their experience. So tell me what you mean, like persecuted Christians. Like, what does this mean? Like, just give us a quick snapshot.
For these men and women that that our organization has served, they're coming from countries where conversion or being Christian is punishable by death. And the community that they live in is actually allowed to kill them. So it doesn't have to be the government that enacts this punishment on them.
Are you allowed to say what countries these are?
Yeah.
Go ahead, give me a couple.
Iran, Afghanistan. Those are the two that I've seen the most in the past few years come from. So Christians that are coming from there.
So if somebody lives in Iran and then they become a Christian or they are Christian and then it gets exposed, the communities that they live in have the authority to end their lives. So there's a lot of things that in my mind that maybe a listener to this who didn't know that might think. And the immediate thing that I think that they might think is, well, shame on Iran. They're the enemy. And I just, like, is that, how would you say the better way to think about that is? Or maybe the more Christian way to think about that is? Because I feel nervous because I think especially when we hear about like other empires or other countries doing things that are grossly evil, it's like, oh, they're the worst. But I remember, G.K. Chesterton saying, he wrote an essay a long, long time ago, and the prompt of the essay was, what's wrong with the world? And his only response, his essay was 2 words, I am.
Wow.
So you're like, okay. So it's easy to look at Iran or Afghanistan and be like, you're the worst, you're evil, you're killing Christians, because if they're Christians, they're on our team. But it's also like, tell me more about your own thoughts about that, because I'm like,
I think for me, in the past few years, befriending and serving clients that are persecuted Christians, I believe that yes, on one level, it's important for the U.S. to use our privilege, to use our voice, to use our influence, to advocate for humane treatment, to advocate for human rights, to advocate for Christians that are being persecuted. But I also think we have personal responsibility ourselves. And I think even right now, it's so important for me to understand what are the impacts of what's taking place in your country. How has that impacted you as a Christian, as a woman, And so for some of these women, they were women that were really high up in their organizations, but to be an educated woman, to be a working professional woman, in some of these countries is a threat, And so I think it's important for me to think through, okay, well, yes, it's important for us to advocate and make it clear that what this country is doing is not okay, but also what's my responsibility?
Right.
What does personal responsibility look like? What has God given me to steward right now for this moment, knowing, like, God knew I was going to have this conversation with this woman from Iran. So what can I do? And I think that right now, like, living out a uniquely Christian personal ethic is so important. And I know, at least for the clients that we serve, that's what they need.
Yeah.
Especially for them, because they're coming to a Christian country, and but feeling the same sense of fear that they felt in their home countries. Does it make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so now I got to get into the nitty gritty a little bit. I got to ask you, you live in a predominantly white space. I know your neighborhood specifically has some diversity in it,
Yeah.
but like largely predominantly white. You attended predominantly white churches. You are married to a black man as a Korean woman. So you have your marriage, which is obviously beautifully diverse. And you have beautifully diverse children, but you're in predominantly white spaces. You're in predominantly privileged and affluent spaces. I remember a friend of ours who would say this all the time. He would say that the church in America specifically is a sleeping giant. Do you know who I'm talking about?
No, who said that?
Foreman.
Oh,
Foreman
okay, yeah.
always talked about the
Yes.
church as a sleeping giant. Like what, as you're neck deep in the craziness of like hanging out with refugees and, you know, dealing with the traumas of people who are persecuted in foreign nations, and then they come here and with nothing and nobody. What's your call? Like, what would be your prophetic call to the church, to anybody that listens to this podcast? Like, what would you say? Like, because I remember reading a book a long time ago by a guy named Ronald Sider. It's called The Scandal of the Evangelical Conscience. Have you heard of this?
I haven't.
Yeah, but he writes a book, and he basically, in his book, he lays out like, it's all data-based, but it's basically like if every Christian in the United States, every person who identifies as Christian, and under the banner of Christian could be Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox, if every Christian in the U.S. gave 10% of their money, which is like our traditional tithe thinking, which biblical, not biblical, who knows, but he said if every American Christian gave 10% of their money, we would have enough resource to be able to provide 3 meals a day to every human being on planet Earth, and for every human being on planet Earth to have universal health care, free health care. And I don't know, that feels crazy. That we have wallets that are so big, yet we are so focused on our own, like Babylon building. So what would be your prophetic call, your prophetic witness for this audience as you're like, and I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
And if you pause too long, I can just edit this part out.
I think my prophetic call would be to actually really encourage people to be with people that are different from themselves.
But Jane, that's scary. Sorry,
It is.
I'm just
It is
parroting
scary.
that.
But I think when we recognize our own story as Christians, that we were the stranger, we were the enemy, we were the prodigal. You know, when we recognize our origins, how we got here, that we were embraced by an enemy-loving God. I think when you start from that place, it kind of changes everything, you know. And I think for us to say, oh yeah, you know, give 10%, you know, we can change the world. But I think actually there's some steps that we need to go through before that. Because I recognize that in my own life, when I'm only around people that look like me, think like me, act like me, value the same things as me, I actually don't change. And a critical piece for me has been actually getting to know, befriend, and really love, and allow myself to be loved by people that are the other, that are different from me. And to intentionally choose those friendships and those relationships, and allow God to transform what it means to be alive right now, what it means to be somebody that's trying to follow Jesus right now. And I think as you start to build those relationships, and for me, like I look at the life of Jesus, I see Jesus who didn't stay in the temple, and he wasn't building more temples.
Mm-hmm.
He was out on the street, and he was breaking bread with the wrong people, and he was hanging out with the wrong people. And I'm like, I was the wrong people. That was me, And because of that, like a Jesus who chose to eat with me, who was so broken or so far gone, I'm like, that's me. And I'm called to do the same. And so how do I do that in my life right now? And I really believe that like circumstances and situations in our lives are not random. But I think when we allow ourselves to slow down and see like different moments or relationships that God has put in our life, it could be that difficult person on the HOA, and God saying, okay, what does it look like for you to be like me in that relationship? And that's a lot harder than sitting in a church on a Sunday. But that's actually what changes us and transforms us. So I think those sorts of like kind of foundational practices are so important. And something that I've just started to do is I really am trying to practice seeing the image of God in other people. And I think oftentimes it's not as hard for us to see the image of God in ourselves. But I think as we practice, I think for me, as I'm practicing that, it's really hard.
Oh, yeah.
It is exceptionally hard.
Especially in our divided culture. Like, it's so crazy, yeah.
Very. But also, I think for me, I have to remind myself, like, that wasn't random, God. I wish that was random. But I know you, God. And I know that nothing's random. And so this is a person that you put in my life, and I need to steward what you've put in me faithfully, and respond to the grace that you've given me and the love that you've given me in a very like practical and tangible way with this person in front of me.
Yeah. So I love all that, and I think the only thing I'm thinking is like, yes, I was the other. Yes, I was the prodigal who was welcomed in. I hear all of that, and I'm like, yes, that's so good. But what is I can feel, and I don't know if this is prophetic, but I can feel like this, it's almost like somebody's like pushing against a really big rubber band. And it's like you get a little bit of traction, but then it kind of pushes you back. And I think that rubber band is probably comfort. And maybe it's money, and maybe it's success, and maybe it's achievement, maybe it's, identity or ego. I don't know what all those things are for different people. I think they might be different for everybody. But like, what would you say is like the one thing, like, how do we cut that rubber band so we can just go be free to live this abundant life? Because I think the abundant life, all the teaching stuff that Jesus was talking about, that's the here and now. Like, that's not like, love me and then you'll go to heaven one day. It's like, like, I love you, you love me, like, go live this abundant life here and now. Like, how do we cut that rubber band, that tension? How do I just, like, break through the selfishness and the ego? And I think I'm looking from you as somebody who's, like, done a lot of it and basically been working through this stuff your entire life. Like, what's one thing that somebody could do who feels stuck? One thing. And again, if you pause too long, I'll just edit it out.
One of the things that I have really been studying is discomfort. And it's interesting, I think, talking to, like, there was an Afghan young woman that I met, and this was years ago. She came to the U.S. by herself. She was 19.
Oh my gosh.
And she basically was on the verge of homelessness because she came here by herself. She won the diversity lottery. She actually graduated from college she got a full ride. And she was the first woman in her family to go to college.
When you say diversity lottery,
Diversity lottery.
I don't even know what that is.
So it's a pathway for people to come to the U.S. It's a visa. And so it's a diversity visa. So it's specifically for countries that are underrepresented.
Huh. So it's not like somebody from any country.
No.
Okay, but Afghanistan specifically.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
And she was an exceptional young woman who spoke 4 languages fluently. And I just was getting to know her, and I asked her, how has it been being in the U.S.? And this is after we'd found our housing. And she said, this is such an interesting country. And I said, yes, like, tell me more.
Yeah.
And she said, it's really interesting what people worry about. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, in America, she was like, you worry about where you're going to go on vacation. Where's your next vacation? You know? And she said, in my country, every day, I would worry if I was going to die that day. And it was like, I mean, extremely sobering. She's Muslim.
Yeah.
Actually was attending a church, and attending a Bible study and getting to know Jesus. And I think hearing about the U.S. from her perspective, and the things that we complain about was really sobering for me.
Yeah.
And painful to hear, you know, but very convicting. And she's like, the things that you find uncomfortable are things that we wish we had to complain about, you know. And so for me, like, as I work with churches and pastors, one of the things that oftentimes comes up as that tension is discomfort. People don't want discomfort because we live in a culture that has increasingly made comfort a value, you know, and you know, you don't have to leave your home, just like with a touch of a button, you get your groceries delivered, you know?
And to fully agree with you, but to take it a step further, we also have turned comfort into blessing.
Yeah.
Like we've said, oh, well, I'm comfortable, and so therefore I'm blessed. And it's like, I don't know that that's necessarily true, especially when you look at the Beatitudes. It's like, blessed are those who are poor, if you're looking at it in Luke's gospel. But yeah. Oh, man.
But I think we miss out when we prioritize discomfort, or comfort, I mean.
Yeah.
And we fear discomfort. Because I'm like, wow, think about all the things that you would miss out on if you excluded yourself from things just because, oh, I might sweat. You know, oh, you know, I might be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That might be a little socially awkward, you know. But think about how much you could have access to, and you could learn or be exposed to. Like, think about all the ways that your understanding of the kingdom of God, of the world, could change if I was okay with being uncomfortable, you know. And I was okay with being in a room where everyone's speaking a different language and I have no idea what they're saying. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because them speaking their language actually makes them feel like they're home. You know? How do we do that? How do we disciple people into embracing discomfort, you know, and seeing that as a way for God to maybe understand the fellowship of suffering with him, you know.
It's so good. Yeah. Makes me think that we should definitely have another conversation on this podcast again.
Sounds good.
Just so rich, and just like, I think it's just expansive. So just to kind of like shore up that point, like when I'm talking about that rubber band that holds us back, you're just saying, just take a leap of faith and just like snap the rubber band and just go get a little bit uncomfortable. If it's in your next door neighbor that you've lived next to for years, but you've never even learned their name or their circumstance, or it's figuring out what organizations are doing really cool stuff and wherever they live.
Yeah.
Just go get involved. Just go put
100%.
yourself out there. Yeah. And it is so good. And I do think that God honors those choices. And that's where the growth happens. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll end it the same way we started it.
Okay.
Hey, I'm Mark Andriani.
I'm Jane Register.
And this is
The
Echo Collective. Jane, that was wonderful.
Okay, good.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about